Breaking news out of the White House as President Trump gets ready to unveil his sweeping plan to overhaul our immigration system and tackle the border crisis. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm John Scott, in for Bill Hemmer, who's on an assignment for a very big interview. More on that in a moment. But first, the president will be laying out his plans in a Rose Garden speech just hours from now. The White House looking to address two key areas: securing the border while also implementing a merit-based immigration system.
The president saying the time to act is now.
Not one more American life should be lost because our lawmakers failed to secure our borders. In the meantime, we have to do it the tough way.
I hope the administration will take this challenge as an opportunity to sit down and address the reality of the need for comprehensive immigration reform.
So word is out on the street in Central America that if you bring a minor child with you, your chance of being deported goes to almost zero. So what I'm trying to do is cut off the faucet. The bucket approach is not working.
Look, they're now starting to realize and admit that the system is broken and we have a real crisis, a humanitarian crisis that they can't even deny.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke live from the North Lawn this morning to kick things off. Hey, Kevin.
Good morning. The idea is simple, right? Change the face of U.S. immigration policy. Now, cooperation won't be so easy, but it all begins with merit-based immigration. Let me show you what is happening now and then sort of take you through what the White House hopes to do moving forward. 12% of immigrants right now are admitted based on their employment and skills. 66%, Sandra, are admitted because of family ties. Here's what the White House would like to do. They'd like to flip it, make it 57% employment and skills, 33% family, 10% humanitarian and other grounds. And don't forget, they want to end the visa lottery. As for border security, the president will talk about that, building the new wall, modernizing ports of entry, closing the asylum law loopholes, updating the legal immigration process. If you know anyone who's tried to immigrate to this country, you know it's long and it's a very expensive process. They also hope to expedite the adjudication process for people with legitimate asylum claims and then quickly remove those who do not. This is a circumstance that's obviously been cast into very sharp focus thanks to immigration laws and practices of our country and effectively jumping the line, White House officials say, ahead of those who are fighting to come here the legal way. But any solution to this problem will have to begin in the halls of Capitol Hill.
White House's plan is not designed to become law. This is designed to become law. The White House plan is trying to unite the Republican Party around border security and merit-based immigration. I'm trying to get some relief to our Border Patrol agents. I'm trying to get put a dent in the smuggling business and keep kids from going on a journey that's got to be helped.
It is clear Lindsey Graham has the president's ear on this. Meanwhile, here at the White House, modernize the system, that's the thinking, and they believe that'll have a lasting impact on our country.
We haven't touched this system in decades, and we've really got to bring it up to speed and make sure that, one, we're protecting our border, and two, that we're bringing people in that can contribute to our society, and that we know who they are, why they're coming in.
To say we're looking forward to what the president has to say is an understatement. It comes your way at 2:30. Of course, I'll have it for you, but for now, back to you.
Kevin Corke at the White House. Kevin, thank you.
Another big story today. Alabama's governor officially signs a bill that would outlaw nearly all abortions in the state. The new law comes with widespread controversy over the most restrictive anti-abortion measure in the nation. It could also set up another challenge to Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court. Jonathan Seri is following this story for us from Atlanta. Jonathan.
Hi, John. That challenge is already in the planning process. Both the ACLU and Planned Parenthood have announced that they are working on lawsuits, their attempt to block this Alabama abortion law from taking effect. Late yesterday, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, a Republican, signed a bill making it a Class A felony for doctors to provide abortions, except in cases where the mother's life is in danger. The new law makes no exceptions for rape or incest and is scheduled to take effect in 6 months. The governor explained in a written statement, many Americans, myself included, disagreed when Roe v. Wade was handed down in 1973. The sponsors of this bill believe that it is time once again for the U.S. Supreme Court to revisit this important matter, and they believe this act may bring about the best opportunity for this to occur. Well, the ACLU of Alabama reacted to Ivey's actions, saying by signing this bill, the governor and her colleagues in the state legislature have decided to waste millions in Alabama taxpayer dollars in order to defend a bill that is simply a political effort to overturn 46 years of precedent that has followed the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision. We will not allow that to happen, and we will see them in court. Later this morning, Democratic presidential candidate Kirsten Gillibrand plans to attend a women's rally at the Georgia State House. Georgia passed similar abortion restrictions last week. And John, these laws are really galvanizing support on both sides of the abortion debate, and it's really shaping up to be a major campaign issue going into the 2020 presidential election cycle. John?
Jonathan Seri reporting live from Atlanta. Thank you.
For more on all this, let's bring in Robert Ray, former federal prosecutor and Whitewater Independent Counsel. Robert, good morning to you. This is the most restrictive anti-abortion measure in the nation, and it looks like some other states are looking to take this up as well. Louisiana may be next. I want to get your legal reaction to this first.
The first thing to say about it is, be careful about overreacting, because the lower federal courts, of course, are currently bound by the Supreme Court's decision in Roe versus Wade. So you're going to see activity in the lower federal courts first before you ever get to the Supreme Court. But it does look to, be a setup for a major court ruling on the horizon. But also be careful about, understanding that the Supreme Court decides ultimately what cases it chooses to take and how it goes about disposing of them, and that may well take some time. So I don't look to see this happening, immediately. On the other hand, it's clearly going to be a presidential campaign issue, so that's coming. But recognize also where the states are lining up. I mean, this has happened now in Alabama. There's legislation in Mississippi and Louisiana. There are also restrictive abortion statutes that have already been enacted, apparently in Indiana and Ohio. And then you have states going the other way, like New York and Virginia. So, I think where the country seems to be, and this is, maybe not a legal opinion or analysis, but the country seems to want to have some balance in this, and is probably going to look to reject extremes. I think that's probably likely where you'll see the Supreme Court come out, at least initially.
You talk about that balance. This Fox News polling on the issue is very interesting for those who were asked and said that they would choose to let it stand on Roe versus Wade. 57% responded. For those familiar with the ruling, it goes even higher to 68%. And those who would look to overturn it, 21%.
But there may be a debate here coming that will be a little different than what we've experienced in terms of the legal framework of Roe, which depends on the right to privacy and the due process clause. I think what you may begin to see is more litigation around the notion of personhood for the fetus and whether or not there were privileges and immunities protections that need to be taken into account in the abortion debate. Where that all goes, of course, is completely uncharted territory, and it's too early to say how the Supreme Court may view this. And also, of course, we recognize that the Supreme Court now looks much different than it did when Roe was decided now more than 40 years ago.
Now moving on to the battle on Capitol Hill, Chairman Nadler of the House Judiciary Committee, he wants more documents pertaining to the Russia investigation. The president's lawyers, the White House is responding in a letter to Chairman Nadler. Here it is. Congressional investigations are intended to obtain information to aid in evaluating potential legislation, not to harass political opponents or to pursue an unauthorized do-over of exhaustive law enforcement investigations conducted by the Department of Justice. That, of course, was signed yesterday. So the White House is saying there's no do-over here. Right. This investigation played out. It ended. We know the conclusion. Why more documents does Nadler want?
It's a legitimate point, but notice that neither side is talking about really the only basis for the Congress to do a do-over, which would be an impeachment proceeding. The Democrats don't want to say that. Chairman Nadler has made clear that he doesn't think that that's the direction this is headed. And the White House is really trying to force the issue because it knows that the only documents that have been to any significant extent withheld from the Congress are those that relate to grand jury material. And the only way, and Nadler knows this too, the only way that the committee gets that material is if it actually would say that what it's doing is an impeachment proceeding, which they're reluctant to do for political reasons. So I think where this is headed is that both sides are going to just kind of stand back a bit. But I do think the administration is right. They had to assert executive privilege over the remainder of the investigative materials. They're not in a position. The Attorney General cannot deliver grand jury material to the Congress absent a court order, and it can't obtain a court order unless both the administration and Chairman Nadler certify to a court that what Congress is doing through the Judiciary Committee is in fact an impeachment proceeding, which apparently neither side wants any part of. So I think that's where the standoff is.
Well, Nadler was asked about that. He certainly didn't rule it out. If he doesn't get what he wants here. Real quickly, this is the reaction from Ken Starr, also a former White House Whitewater independent counsel. Here's Ken Starr.
Book one demonstrates in page after page that there was no collusion. The no collusion isn't just a bottom line. It is on virtually every page.
So page after page, he makes the case that there's no reason to dig further here.
And that figured in, obviously, to the Attorney General's ultimate determination with regard to obstruction of justice. It's, as a matter of law, you can still imagine that an obstruction case could be brought, but it's really on very thin ice if you're talking about the fact that there's no underlying crime that was committed, which is what Ken Starr is referring to. In other words, that the investigation also established that there was no collusion. So, look, the end result of all of that, and I think Chairman Nadler seems to recognize this, is that would be a very thin basis to proceed any further with an impeachment proceeding. So I think that's where the rubber meets the road, and I think this is going to likely peter out in time. Now, how much more time that will take and how quickly we sort of transition into a presidential campaign remains to be seen. But I think that's what the consensus seems to be gathering, that there's not public support for an impeachment proceeding.
Got it. Robert Ray, great to get your reaction to all that this morning.
Nice to be with you. Thank you.
And we will hear straight from William Barr himself when Bill Hemmer sits down with him for a big interview. That is happening today. It will be Barr's first interview as Attorney General in the Trump administration. Of course, the first since all of this Mueller drama began. That interview will be airing tomorrow right here at 9 a.m. on America's Newsroom. So stay tuned for that.
And this Fox News alert, a stunning new report shedding new light on the threat from Iran that prompted all this escalation from the White House. Iranian military leaders saying they are prepared for war. Details on that straight ahead.
Bill Barr will be confronting the crisis surrounding the growth of one of the most dangerous and brutal gangs in the world. How the Trump administration is targeting MS-13 next.
And a new push from House Republicans to tackle anti-Semitism in this nation. Congressman Lee Zeldin is one of two Jewish Republicans in the House. He joins us next.
Well, I'll tell you what. These people who are promoting all this anti-Semitism every day double down and triple down. They're looking to recruit more in their ranks. They are bullying their fellow Democrats who know better and want to do something about it.
Donald Trump must be stopped. I've beaten him before, and I will do it again. I'm Bill de Blasio, and I'm running for president because it's time we put working people first.
And then there were 23. That's New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio throwing his hat into the ring, officially announcing he's running for president this morning. The 58-year-old, currently in his second term, says he wants to put working families first. He becomes the 23rd Democrat trying to win the party's nomination next year.
Attorney General William Barr heading to El Salvador as the Trump administration looks to combat the notorious MS-13 gang. My next guest represents a district that has suffered at the hands of the notoriously brutal gang. Congressman Lee Zeldin on the House Foreign Affairs Committee joins us now. Congressman, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It is one of the most brutal gangs, one of the largest gangs on the planet. 8,000 to 10,000 members, one of the most violent gangs on Long Island. This is a problem for you and your district. 25 killings on Long Island between 2016 and 2018 alone. What can we do about this? How are we fighting this?
Since President Trump came into office, the Department of Justice, the administration, President Trump himself
have had significantly greater focus on this issue, different levels of government working together. What we've seen over the course of these last couple of years with a big crackdown, taking out MS-13 leadership and others. It's not just the high-profile, brutal murders that make national news. It's the regular instances of drug trafficking and sex trafficking, the human trafficking that's taking place. It takes a very human toll on the victims. So fortunately, what we've seen with the heavier focus is a crackdown with the Eastern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office, with the DOJ. There's more to be done, and it really requires, to a certain extent, when you're talking about a transnational gang, it's a transnational effort, and a lot of the money flow goes between countries where the DEA, the FBI need any additional tools, changes in law. We in Congress need to be providing the administration with the maximum support possible to prevent any further loss of life and any other further victims.
We'll see how that all goes, and we'll hear more from William Barr in that big interview, of course, with Bill Hemmer soon. Congressman, if I could transition to another trend that you are identifying in the House of Representatives, and that is anti-Semitism and rhetoric and acts that you have identified as a growing trend in Congress. What are you planning to do about that?
Just yesterday, House Republicans filed what's called a discharge petition. If 218 members of the House of Representatives signs this discharge petition, we'll have a vote on anti-BDS legislation. BDS is the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement. Unfortunately, the founder of BDS was blatantly anti-Semitic with all sorts of horrible quotes to back that up. We have Jewish students on college campuses all across America being targeted with blatant anti-Semitism in the name of BDS. We need to send a strong statement as a body that we stand against all this anti-Semitism, all of the anti-Israel hate. Israel is our greatest ally in the Middle East, and it's a relationship that we should be strengthening, not weakening. But we also, beyond making a statement, need to also do something about it. Pass legislation with teeth. So the House Republicans, we filed it yesterday. I would encourage any of my Democratic colleagues, many whom we know support the legislation itself, to sign this discharge petition to force a vote. The Senate has already passed this bill. And one other thing that I would point out is what we've seen over the course of this week is that Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, is actually going in the wrong direction, where she's now attacking Republicans, calling on us to apologize to these people who are pushing it.
So specifically, you are talking about this instance with a recent member of Congress making comments about the Holocaust. Republicans called on Nancy Pelosi to condemn those remarks. She instead said that Republicans were twisting her words and that it was a smear campaign. Finally, your thoughts on that, and do you fear that you're further dividing Congress with this move?
Well, I will tell you that, well, first off, we should be uniting Congress in the effort to strengthen our relationship with our greatest ally. We should be uniting Congress to stand unequivocally, forcefully in condemning anti-Semitism, whether it's in American politics, the halls of Congress, or college campuses. But what should be noted with that interview with my colleague Rashida Tlaib last Friday is that she was being asked about her support for a one-state solution. Her solution is one that removes Jews from power in their own country, in Israel, and answering that.
And we heard a lot about that, and I know that you've been very active on this issue. We'll see where it all goes, Congressman. We appreciate your time this morning, and we'd like to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
The acting head of the Federal Aviation Administration taking heat from lawmakers on Capitol Hill in the wake of two deadly crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX jets and the grounding of that plane. How lawmakers are pushing for transparency.
As our work continues, I want to offer this assurance. In the U.S., the 737 MAX will return to service only when the FAA's analysis of the facts and technical data indicate that it's safe to do so.
That's the acting FAA administrator facing criticism yesterday on Capitol Hill after he said decisions by the pilots contributed to those two deadly crashes of Boeing 737 MAX 8 jets. Rob Mark is a commercial pilot and senior editor of Flying Magazine. Rob, they blamed the pilots to some extent for this system that apparently the pilots didn't know anything about?
It's pretty easy to blame the pilots when they're not here to defend themselves. But, of course, the pilots are always a part of the situation. They're the one manipulating the airplane. But there's a huge but there. As you mentioned, most of the pilots knew nothing about this system before we even heard anything at all from the FAA. Boeing told nobody anything.
The system was designed because they put bigger engines, more powerful engines on the plane. Because they were bigger, they had to move them essentially forward on the wing, and that leads to some pitch attitudes, some nose up or nose down attitudes that can be potentially a problem. So the computer was designed to fix that, right? The MCAS system?
That's correct. Yeah, the airplane would have been technically unstable without that computer software issue. And again, the idea is great. I mean, as long as the software works. And Boeing considered it to be so rare a possibility that they didn't even think the pilots needed to know about it. Yeah. And of course, they really didn't until it broke.
I am reminded of the Titanic, a ship that was unsinkable until it sank. A little too much faith in technology here?
Oh, I think the technology is good. I think what we certainly lack here is some common sense. Somewhere in Boeing or in the FAA to say, hey, we haven't told the pilots about this, but you know, if something ever happened that this system went haywire, these people could really have their hands full. Nah, we don't need to tell them that.
Well, there are concerns even among members of Congress about the transparency of the system that's been developed here. Listen to this exchange.
What were the steps the FAA took in reviewing the MCAS system and the accompanying training? Because I've asked it now 3 times. And I'd be blunt with you, sir, with all due respect, I haven't gotten a direct answer, and the committee deserves it.
We will get that answer for you, sir.
So the answer apparently is not out there yet, and one of the concerns is that Boeing was allowed to self-certify its own software systems because the FAA is so short on inspectors and technicians who can kind of keep an eye on these things.
I think that is true, and of course, you know, as a pilot, John, we're used to having the manufacturers being involved in the certification. But again, I think what really bothers me about this from FAA and Boeing's perspective is that it didn't matter how powerful this software was. It never quite reached the level of the checking the boxes for the bureaucracy that anybody could say, we need to look at this a little more. And there just didn't seem to be any common sense there.
But here's one of my questions. I mean, there are 3 U.S. airlines, U.S. flagged carriers that fly the 737 MAX. Southwest has a bunch of them. American had some. United had some. And all those flights in this country went off without a hitch, tens of thousands of them. Why the disparity between the 2 crashes overseas?
That's something we're really going to have to try to look at. I know yesterday the NTSB Chairman Robert Sumwalt said training should be the same for all pilots around the world that are flying the same airplane. We don't know if there's an element of training for the pilots in these other areas that affected them. That's the great unknown at this point, but that's the part we're just going to have to wait for the final report to take a look at.
Rob Mark. Rob, thanks very much for your expertise.
You're welcome, John.
Brand new Fox polling out just last night showing voters feeling good about the economy and giving President Trump some good marks on his job approval as well. Charles Payne has something to say about that. He will join us next.
Plus, we are learning now what led to the deadliest wildfire in California history, who officials are now blaming for the disaster that killed 85 people last fall.
And the White House eyeing up $20 billion to bail out America's farmers as the trade war with China heats up. Up next, we'll talk to the Vice President of the National Farmers Union.
We love our farmers. We take care of our farmers. Our farmers have been incredible. No country can get in the way of our farmers. Our farmers are great patriots, and they've done a fantastic job. So our farmers are going to be very well taken care of.
Check of the markets right now after Washington moves to blacklist Chinese tech giant Huawei escalating the trade battle between the two biggest economies in the world. You can see the Dow Jones up 108 points right now. If that's part of the equation, Wall Street is liking it. 25,759 at this moment.
And there you have at least a rally now. It was a scary start to the week, a big sell-off last week. A lot of uncertainty can hurt markets, but at least for now, a little bit of relief with a 100-point gain on the Dow. We'll keep watching that.
We're going to take the highest year, the biggest purchase that China has ever made with our farmers, which is about $15 billion, and do something reciprocal to our farmers so our farmers can do well. They'll be planting, they'll be able to sell for less, and they'll make the same kind of money until such time as it's all straightened out.
President Trump putting the spotlight on farmers hurt by the trade war with China, promising a new aid package for those feeling the brunt of the new tariff hikes. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue saying up to $20 billion could be made available as part of this bailout. Joining us now is Patty Edelberg, Vice President of the National Farmers Union. Patty, good morning to you. I know that, looking at states like Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, there's a real impact here. And we really wanted to look and dig deeper into that and talk to you and the farmers and those who represent the farmers and tell us what has the impact been on our farmers?
It's been insane. We've had a lot of farmers, a lot more bankruptcies going on, a lot more farmer suicides. These things are highlighting many of the news stories in our local news. But we have more commodities, more grains sitting on the ground right now because we lost huge export markets. We lost export markets that we had for 30 years that we'll never get a chance to get back again. So farmers are hoping and hopeful to get their crops in the ground this year, but really hopeful that we have a place to sell it come fall.
And it's horrible for all of us to hear that. As the president said, we love our farmers and we want to support our farmers. And as a result, you're hearing that the White House is thinking about a big aid package, $15 to $20 billion in financial aid for American farmers. Is this a solution? Would this help?
It'll help. I'm not going to call it a solution by any means. It'll definitely help. Farmers are in need of some excellent or some financial help at this point, but we need a long-term fix. We don't need Band-Aids. We need long-term fixes to make sure that farmers are able to survive, whether that's, and we understand what President Trump is doing with China. We've been trying to fix their manipulative trade practices for years, their policies for years, but the way we're going about it may not be the right fix. So,
because that is what you hear, Patty, is that, for the long-term gain, there's going to be some short-term gain. But obviously, when you're at the ground level and you're feeling that, it's different. And to make it through, it is a different situation for all of you. And you're even hearing from some Democrats and Chuck Schumer, an unlikely source of support for the president on this issue, wanting to press firmly on China. Here he is. And I want to open that back up to you after this. Listen to Chuck Schumer.
We have to have tough, strong policies against China, or they'll continue to steal millions of American jobs and trillions of American dollars. We ought to all be united and aimed at China, and I think we'd come to a very good solution quickly.
So what I hear from you is that while the pain is a lot right now, you do support the president's decision to go hard on China. And like Chuck Schumer, there's a reason why we're doing this, and the timing of this, we have to do it now?
Well, I agree with Chuck Schumer on this as well, but we're also alienating a lot of our trading partners, which is just causing a major hurt for our farmers and ranchers on the ground level. They're to the point now where there's so many of them that aren't going to be able to go on. So being able to have some type of a short-term fix before the long-term fix is a definite need for farmers and ranchers in America.
We hear you, and we had our brain room dig up, just as an example, some of the statistics and the real numbers that are involved here with our agricultural markets, like soybeans, one of our largest. And the tariffs have had a big negative impact there on our industry, with the value of U.S. soybean exports to China dropping 74%. Over a one-year period. Certainly that's a lot of the pain that you and your farmers are feeling.
No, absolutely. There's no place to go with these soybeans. There's no place to go with a lot of the corn. And farmers are sitting on it and hoping that they're able to sell it, hoping that the markets come back. Unfortunately, we're not seeing an end in sight. With the escalation of this trade war, with the new tariffs that are going to be implemented, we're not going to see much of an end, sadly, and our farmers are just the ones taking the brunt of the hit.
I know there's a lot of other things.
Whether there's a place to sell.
Yeah.
Whether there's a place to sell these beans in the fall is what a lot of farmers are counting on. So
there's a lot at play there, and a lot that plays into everything that you're seeing there today. And we're with you. We wanted to hear your voice and as part of all of this, and as this continues. So, Patty, we appreciate your time this morning. We'll check back in with you at a later date. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, on top of the new tariff hikes, the Trump administration is taking a breakdown all of this in our next hour.
Some shocking video to show you of a parent apparently trying to trip a player at a youth basketball tournament near Sacramento. That player's dad was shooting video and caught it on tape after his son told him during the game that the same woman had been telling her child to elbow players in the face. The boy's dad put up the video on Facebook, adding, quote, "Luckily, he didn't get hurt or seriously injured. I don't know why an adult would even attempt to harm a kid." According to local media, the woman has been asked not to return to the tournament.
No, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Lucky she's not facing, assault charges or something like that.
And glad he's doing okay.
Yeah,
Could have been worse.
Mm.
All right. Well, breaking news now as we get another report on recent actions from Tehran. We're now learning that there were missiles in the Persian Gulf that may have prompted recent escalation from the White House. Lawmakers from both parties want answers. We're going to talk to Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher to get his take.
Plus, a great white shark the size of a car now heading up the East Coast. Researchers are tracking it. We'll tell you where she's going.
A great white shark weighing in at more than 2,100 pounds is heading towards North Carolina's Outer Banks. According to researchers who are tracking the shark, they've named her Luna. The team seen hauling her up onto their boat and fitting her with an electronic tracer. They got a ping from that device last week about 100 miles southeast of Charleston. Wow.
I love sharks in general and great whites.
Wow, look at that.
She is spectacular.
Amazing footage there.
I hope she has a good trip.
Yes, indeed.
Don't get in her way.
We do not need another Iraq weapons of mass destruction moment where we were falsely led into a military engagement in Iraq, which was one of the biggest mistakes we have had in foreign policy. This is like making foreign policy and national security decisions in the blind. And so I've never seen an administration that is less forthcoming about such critical information.
A growing number of lawmakers calling for transparency as the White House moves American assets in response to a potential threat from Iran. The New York Times reporting the moves are in response to new photos showing Tehran had loaded missiles on boats in the Persian Gulf. Joining us now, Republican Congressman from Wisconsin, Mike Gallagher. He is a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Gallagher, what do you know about the Iranian moves, and what do you think about the U.S. response?
Without getting into any classified reporting, obviously, it is my belief that the threat from Iran is credible. It is multifaceted. It is a threat to our own troops and our allies in the region. And therefore, I think we need to be taking appropriate steps to deter Iran from further action. I think pre-positioning assets, moving a carrier strike group, moving bombers will send a signal of strength that will hopefully convince the Iranians not to lash out any further. The fact that they're lashing out should not surprise us because their economy is being squeezed right now. The regime is in a very precarious and weak position right now since we've decided to eliminate the waivers of sanctions and impose additional sanctions.
But the Iranians typically don't attack the U.S. directly. They use their proxy forces, Hezbollah, to go after Israeli forces or sometimes Americans. Would they be so stupid as to directly launch a missile attack against U.S. forces?
I would hope not, because they would be met with an overwhelming and crippling response. We've gone down this road with Iran in the past. But by working through their proxies, they can create a lot of instability. And again, the essence of deterrence is by showing a signal of strength, you can hopefully avoid war, which is an outcome I think we should all support. But my hope is that the Iranian regime doesn't take any further provocative action. But we can't forget that it is the Iranian regime that is being provocative. We are responding to credible threat reporting, and we have to do what is necessary, certainly to protect our own people and our troops in the region.
Senator Dianne Feinstein seems to have some concerns with how the administration is handling it.
We should not provoke a conflict. I think that's what's happening. I think we ought to find a way to sit down and have a decent conversation. I think that's possible. I happen to know the foreign minister of Iran, know him quite well. He's a very reasonable man and would not be encouraging this kind of activity on the part of his country. I deeply believe that.
I hope you were able to hear that. The audio was a little muddied, but she says we should not provoke a conflict. I think that's what's happening. How is sending an aircraft carrier battle group into the Persian Gulf area, how is that provoking a conflict?
First of all, the idea that the foreign minister of Iran is a reasonable man is totally absurd and at odds with reality. The foreign minister of Iran is shilling for a brutal regime that sends billions of dollars every single year to terrorist groups around the Middle East and around the world that kill innocent civilians. So I would disagree strongly with that premise. And the idea that we are the provocative party is also absurd. It is Iran that is threatening us, and by showing that signal of strength, we can tell the Iranians to back down and we can avoid war. So I would disagree strongly with the senator on multiple points that she made.
There have been some holes blown in the hulls of various ships in the Persian Gulf. The Iranians are pointing the finger at anyone but themselves. Do you have any more information as to who's responsible?
Well, I believe it to be Iranian proxies. We've seen the Iranians use drones to attack commercial ships. We've seen the Iranians attach limpet mines to commercial ships in an effort to foment chaos. And I think ultimately all of this leads back to the Iranian regime, which is, of course, lashing out in response to the economic pressure that we're putting on them. I think this is evidence that the maximum pressure campaign is actually working. And remember, for months and months of last year, we had protests throughout the streets in Iran, from Iran's own people, protests against the regime, protests against their reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and their use of money from sanctions relief in order to further fund terrorist organizations around the world. And so the regime is in a very weak position right now and is lashing out.
House Armed Services Committee member Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a brand new move that could change the face of the entire college admissions process. Why the SAT exam will now be giving students an adversity score. What it means, straight ahead.
Plus, if you've never seen the Statue of Liberty up close, this might be the year to go. The brand new attraction opening today on Liberty Island.
Liberty. Lift your lamp of hope a little.
There is something, like, in many ways beautiful about that. My ancestors, many had died or had to give up their livelihood, their human dignity to provide a safe haven for Jews in our world. I got a text message from a friend who's like, hey, next time, really clarify, maybe talk like a fourth grader, because maybe the racist idiots would understand you better.
Well, that was Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib defending her comments on Israel and the Holocaust after criticism from many Republicans. The freshman Democrat telling Seth Meyers last night she needs to dumb down her remarks to get through to, as you just heard, quote, racist idiots. Let's bring in Congressman David Kustoff, the Republican from Tennessee. He sits on the Financial Services Committee with Tlaib, and as I mentioned earlier, you're one of two Jewish members of the House, Republican members of the House, I should say. And you offer a unique reaction this morning. What was your response when you originally heard her comments?
Well, it's amazing to me that any congressman would reference the Holocaust metaphorically. I just don't see how that is smart at all. And I was really taken aback by her comments. But Sandra, also, it's cumulative, because we've seen really other Democrat members throughout the last 3 or 4 months make these anti-Semitic remarks. They're cumulative, they pile up, and at some point we really need to see the Democratic leadership stand up and take a stand to show the nation and really the world that Congress won't tolerate these types of remarks.
You know, and we heard similar comments from Lee Zeldin, the other Jewish Republican in the House, who is identifying what he is seeing a rising trend of anti-Semitic acts and rhetoric inside and outside the walls of Congress. I want to replay her original remarks so that we can dig into that and see how maybe she could have responded that would have appeased concern about these words. Here she is.
Right.
There's a kind of a calming feeling I always tell folks when I think of the Holocaust and the tragedy of the Holocaust and the fact that it was my ancestors, Palestinians, who lost their land and some lost their lives. All of it was in the name of trying to create a safe haven for Jews.
She, Congressman, makes the case that her words were pulled out of context. So we wanted to make sure we aired her remarks there so everyone could hear. She says her words were twisted. You heard that again last night. She doubled down on that. Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the party in the House, she said that this has been a smear